to the President of the European Council, Donald Tusk. You have the floor, Mr. Tusk.
Danke. President, members of the European Parliament, the last European Council was as difficult as any of my term. And even though we found a common solution, the real test of time is ahead of us, of course because of the referendum in the United Kingdom on whether or not to remain a member of the European Union. Only the British people can and will decide that. What we could do on our side was to agree a new settlement for Britain within the EU, and we did. The 28 heads of state or government unanimously agreed and adopted a legally binding and irreversible settlement for the United Kingdom in the EU. The decision concerning a new settlement is in conformity with the treaties and cannot be annulled by the European Court of Justice. But it will only enter into force if the British people vote to stay. If they vote to leave, the settlement will cease to exist. We have agreed to do all this in a way that does not compromise the European Union's fundamental values, such as the freedom of movement and the principle of non-discrimination, and without compromising the future development of the economic and monetary union. If I had had any doubts about this, I would never have proposed such a settlement. Despite many difficulties, the leaders did not walk away from the negotiating table because we were fully aware of the stakes involved, namely keeping the UK in the EU and the future geopolitics of Europe. Here I would like to express sincere thanks to President Juncker and his whole team with whom we worked side by side during the process. Let me also thank the Parliament's negotiators who were engaged in the negotiations and who were highly effective in obtaining their goals. It is my firm belief that we needed to involve the European Parliament fully in this process. I will always remember the crucial talks with President Schulz, with Group Leader Verhofstadt and distinguished colleagues Gualtieri and Brok. It is thanks to you that this agreement allowed us to take into consideration the interests of the Union as a whole. Without your help, this agreement would not have been possible. Thank you very much again. The European Union will respect the decision of the British people. If the majority votes to leave, that is what will happen. It will change Europe forever. And it will be a change for the worse. Of course, this is my personal opinion. Prime Minister Cameron said in the House of Commons on Monday that now is not the time to split the West. I couldn't agree more. This is why I did my best to prevent that. On the other hand, if Britain decides to stay, I hope this Parliament will also ensure that the agreed settlement is transformed into the necessary legislation and will enter into force. Dear members, let me now turn to the migration crisis. Leaders agreed that our joint action plan with Turkey remains a priority and we must do our utmost for it to succeed. This ultimately means that the high numbers we are still witnessing have to go down, and quickly so. This is also why we decided to organize a special meeting with Turkey on the 7th of March. The discussion among leaders focused on building consensus in this crisis. To do that, we must first avoid having a battle among plans A, B and C. It does not make any sense, as it only creates divisions within Europe without bringing us any closer to a solution. Instead, we must look for a synthesis of different approaches. There is no good alternative to a comprehensive European plan. Secondly, a European response is not only about the decisions taken in Brussels. It is also, and even more so, about the decisions taken in the capitals. We must accept that, but at the same time, we should seek to improve the coordination of those decisions. The European Union is here for all of us to cooperate. And lastly, we must respect the rules and laws that we have all adopted together. This concerns both the decisions on relocation as well as the need to gradually go back to a situation where all members of the Schengen area fully apply the Schengen Borders Code. There is no doubt we need to restore Schengen. It will cost money, take time, and require huge political effort. There will be countries that may not be able to cope with this challenge, but Europe will be there to assist them. We need to invest in Schengen, not in its collapse. Its future will be one of the key issues to be discussed by the leaders on March the 7th. Separately, leaders confirmed the need to keep humanitarian aid flowing to Syria and the Syrian refugees in the region. We welcomed the donors' conference in London, where 2/3 of the pledges came from Europe. Leaders agreed to move quickly to disburse the 3.3 billion euros pledged for 2016, as well as the 3 billion euros agreed to help the refugees in Turkey. This is not only a European responsibility. Therefore, I will continue to build a global response to this crisis at the G7 and G20 meetings later this year. Finally, I want to end with a plea not to allow the stormy days derail our efforts. We cannot simply wait and see. We have entered a most dangerous time in European history. We must act with resolve. I count on your support. Thank you.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much, Mr. President of the European Council. President of the Commission, President Juncker.
Sehr verehrter Herr Präsident.
President, we had a debate with our British friends which was tough and which took time. The negotiations were difficult, but at the end of the day we proved together, the 27 other member states in the United Kingdom, that Europe is capable of taking decisions even if the situation it's coping with is particularly difficult. I'd like to pay tribute here in particular to President Tusk, who calmly and effectively assisted the Commission in concluding the debate with elegance and ability, and I would address the same compliments to President Schulz and the European Parliament's Sherpas, without whom and without whose inspiration the outcome would not have been what it was. We have achieved an agreement with the United Kingdom. The UK Prime Minister got the most he could obtain, and the other member states offered him as much as they could offer, which leads me to say that the deal with the UK is fair, balanced, and complies with the great principles of the European Union and takes into account the concerns, desiderata and suggestions of the United Kingdom. I therefore think that the British people, which through the course of history have proved their wisdom and courage time and again, will say yes to the arrangements that we have arrived at with the United Kingdom. The Commission, from the day that the British people approve those arrangements, will pass legislative texts to Parliament and Council, in particular with regard to the social aspects of the agreement arrived at with the United Kingdom. At that juncture, the legislative proposals from the Commission will come to you as soon as they have been tabled in German. Of course, we also looked at refugees and migration issues. It won't have escaped you that the European Council confirmed what the European Council had decided in principle in the past. And now it's a question of ensuring that decisions are appropriately implemented. And that's why on March the 7th a further European Council will take place, not just with our Turkish colleagues, but also with the 28 member states, to contemplate ways in which we, as quickly as possible, can fully apply the Schengen Protocol. The European Council has made loud and clear that only a European approach to the refugee problem will achieve the objective. Proceeding nationally will prevent us from doing that. At the moment, the Commission is in a legal dispute with Austria. I can say that Austria, a country very close to my heart, should not see this as concerted action against Austria. I'm full of wonder at the efforts Austria has made on refugees in recent years. We are now attempting, together with our Austrian colleagues, to deal with this matter, and I hope that we will be successful. Thank you very much, President.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you. Next, on behalf of the EPP group, Mr. Weber.
Mr. President, dear colleagues, what situation does Europe find itself in at the moment? We have war in the Ukraine, in Syria, in Libya. We have in Putin a neighbor who is imperialist and aggressive. We have a situation in Europe where many people are looking for employment and prosperity. If you look at the situation across Europe, you can see that it's very difficult. At the last European Council, it was difficult to see how fair welfare benefits or the City of London's concerns could be put in pride of place as the most important priorities on the European Council's agendas. My question is, should these be considered the priorities? Unfortunately, the British brought these issues to the table and they had to be discussed. The British wanted to discuss these special requests and requirements, and I think it's very good that we've managed to come to an agreement. That agreement is now on the table and we can support it. David Cameron put forward his points, he fought for them and got a solid outcome for the citizens of the United Kingdom. We in the EPP group support the core of the agreement, and what is clear is that if the people of the United Kingdom choose to remain within the European Union, then they will find in the EPP a fair partner in achieving the implementation of those goals. One thing we have to make absolutely clear is that that agreement will be respected. If people are being told in the United Kingdom that if they say no, then they will get a better deal, we have to say to them very clearly that the agreement which is on the table is the agreement. And this is the agreement that the EPP will support, and there will be no follow-up negotiations. My dear colleagues, this debate is now up to the British people, and now it's important to clarify the truth of the matter. Nigel Farage has said that the UK can perform much better outside of the European Union. Why is Europe growing to the tune of 6% despite the fact that it's in Europe? And why is it that the Indians and the USA are asking the UK to remain within the European Union because it's better for their trade? Nigel Farage has said that thousands of foreign fighters are infiltrating the UK because of its agreement because of its membership of the EU, whereas the military leaders in the United Kingdom have spoken out together against Britain leaving the European Union. Nigel Farage wants to peddle untruths to the people of Britain, and I think he is looking forward to a time when Britain leaves the United Kingdom. And guess who else is looking forward to that? Vladimir Putin. They want to split the European Union, to fragment the European Union so that they can infiltrate better, and we have to stop them doing this. So that is why we would say to the British people, let's do things together. We live at a time of major uncertainty and insecurities. We have to be sensible. Divided Europe is weaker. It is definitely weaker in terms of trying to tackle these difficulties, and so hopefully the British citizens will choose to address their problems together with us in the future. Now, ladies and gentlemen, turning to migration, the President of the Commission has said that the decisions taken at Council have already been confirmed. That's good. However, unfortunately, I think there's still a lot of national egotism and party politics at work here. I have to say that expressly. If you look at things from a positive angle, you can see that there is a clear commitment that we have to secure the borders of Europe, and to support our commitments on that front. The people who are fleeing bombs in Aleppo, the Russian bombs as well, those people should not be neglected and abandoned on the Turkish border. That's why we've asked the Turks to open up the border, but at the same time we have to regulate things at the Greek border as well. For the humanitarian approach, our continent has to act properly, and that's why we need to work together. On the one hand, securing borders properly, but at the same time showing our willingness to cooperate. Now, we've done enough talking, now we have to start acting. And perhaps by way of conclusion, Mr. President, I'd just like to say that the Bertelsmann Foundation a few days ago issued a representative study which is published across Europe. This is asking people, not politicians, their opinions on things, and there were two questions asked there, and the results were that 79% of people across Europe want us to keep the freedom to travel. Even 60% of British people want to keep freedom of travel across Europe, and 69% of people, a vast majority of people then, want us to help refugees to solve this refugee problem. And sometimes people know more than politicians. Thank you.
Herr Weber, der Abgeordnete Carver.
Mr. Carver wants to put a question to you. Do you, Mr. Carver?
No. Sir Carver, you called me, sorry. Thank you, Mr. Weber. Could I just ask you to repeat what you just said in the question? You said the renegotiation that has been agreed is the final renegotiation. There are some people in the United Kingdom who are giving the impression to the British electorate that there will be a referendum, and depending on the result, they will come back and there will be a renegotiation. Please, for clarity, would you confirm to the people of the United Kingdom that the renegotiation has now been completed and there will be no further renegotiations after the referendum has taken place? Thank you.
Well, if you need a clarification of what I've just said, I'm only too happy to do that. The proposal is there on the table. That is the offer on the table from all sides. It is a compromise. Every party has come close to each other's position. That's the idea of a compromise, and I think that's what we have to take into account. Both sides have made movement and come to a compromise. It's a good agreement. That is the offer that Europe is making to the British people. We hope that Cameron and everyone in the for camp can convince the British people to get on board with that. If it is a no, then there will be no follow-up negotiation.
Thank you very much. Now, on behalf of the Socialists and Democrats, Mr. Pittella. Thank you, Mr. President. Let me say in all clarity on behalf of my group, the United Kingdom must remain in the European Union, not just for reasons of convenience. All of us know that any possible Brexit would be a leap in the dark, with disastrous consequences, particularly for the Brits themselves. But this is not just a marriage of convenience. The United Kingdom, in our view, must remain in the Union because it's part and parcel of Europe. We, and also the United Kingdom, have a shared history and culture. We share so much. Without London, without the United Kingdom, Europe would no longer be itself, would not be the same thing. Now, thanks to the agreement on Friday, and thanks to all those who contributed, President Schulz, President Juncker, and my good friend in the European Council. But let me also add, with equal clarity, that we cannot accept being taken hostage by the internal balance within the British Tory party. It's not acceptable at a time when Europe is in the midst of the worst crisis in its history for weeks to be spent discussing voting conditions in Council or the ins and outs of the banking union. The Friday Agreement, it repeats the fact, it reiterates the fact that in legal terms the principle of free movement of citizens is intact. It's not going to be touched. And I take note of that. However, I'm not convinced by one aspect, and that is the social dimension. Imagine two young people, both of them, Europeans, the same job, the same work. There is a danger that one of the two, for the sole fact that they're not British, would have less rights than the other. And that is discrimination. Even though I very much hope, that we'll see this will be denied, this will be gainsaid in the proposals which will come from the Commission after the results of the referendum. For us, there are certain principles. There are things which must be handled with great care. Otherwise, the danger is these are like wires. We must be careful because they can be live wires. And we don't want to see any distinction in terms of rights between different citizens in the European Union. And we will fight to make sure that Britain stays with us. And let me say, with every respect for the British citizens, and it's up to them, it's down to them now, and them alone, to take their choice. Let me say with great respect that you have been leaders in the world, protagonists. The UK has done so much, has been a factor for peace and democracy. Those values are in the DNA, in the bloodstream of the United Kingdom. And the best place to demonstrate, to live out those and to body forth those principles is the European Union, together with your partners. And we can rise to the challenges which face us in time and in the world, at a time of exile and fear, the tumultuous after effects of globalization, the solitude and the sadness and the feeling of being left behind. And unity is a tremendous source of strength. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Herr.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pittella. Mr. Batten wants to ask you a question.
Ja, bitte. Okay, Herr Batten, ja.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Pittella. Now I need some clarification, please, because I was listening to what you said, and if I got your gist correctly, you seem to be saying that there could be no discrimination in social rights. Now, paltry as the agreement may have been that Mr. Cameron's come back with, it does say that for a period anyway, we can pay people child benefit at the rate in their own country, not in our country. So that would be discrimination in the real sense of the word. I believe you said something like that we'll have to see what happens when the legislation comes through the Parliament. Are you saying that this legislation could be different from the agreement, and the agreement may be changed, or previous speakers have said it will not be changed? So which is it? Are you saying the Parliament could change it if it wanted to, and will it?
Thank you very much. You're an MEP and you know the rules of the House as well as anyone, and I'm not inventing anything. At a time when we are expressing the hope that the British will vote to maintain the United Kingdom in the European Union, the European Commission will need to put before the House, before Parliament, as co-lawmaker, implementing provisions. At that point, we will be able to examine them and to debate them. No parliament in the world, the parliaments are free to come to their conclusions. We cannot preempt or second-guess those proposals. Once those proposals emanate, we shall examine them in a constructive spirit. We want, at all events, for the United Kingdom to remain within the European Union. Thank you. Next, on behalf of the ECR Group, Mr. Fox.
Thank you, President. The deal struck last week was hard fought by all sides. Many countries had concerns and objections, but I am glad that those hurdles were overcome. Aided by willpower, fuelled by packets of Haribo, and sealed following a visit to the chip shop, we found an agreement that enshrines the United Kingdom's special status as a country never joining the euro and never joining Schengen, as a country that does not wish to be part of the ratchet of the European political project, that delivers a live and let live agreement, one where the United Kingdom continues to play an active role in the European Union, without facing discrimination in areas where it wishes to keep national control. The ECR Group welcomes this deal, and now it is for the British people to pass judgment on these new terms. Ladies and gentlemen, I will be supporting the campaign to remain in the European Union. Easy, gentlemen. My reasoning is simple. Britain's economic recovery, though good, is still fragile, and I will not put it at risk by tearing us away from the single market. And I also believe that my constituents will be safer and my country more secure if we continue our cooperation with our European partners. There are good people who would disagree with me, and I respect their decision. And if the British people decide to leave, then we must respect that choice and make it work. But there are also those in this chamber who are not respectful of other people's choices. We can hear them jeering today behind me, those who compare the EU with the Soviet Union. I think that is foolish and offensive to those who actually lived under the yoke of communism. Because unlike the USSR, any country is free to leave the European Union. Mr. Farage, that is the will of the sovereign people. Being in the EU is a choice, and the Conservative Party will respect that choice. So, Mr. President, the voters in Britain will exercise their sovereignty. They will decide whether to remain or to leave. And in the UK, we can now look forward to debating this subject for the next 4 months. The EU must concentrate on the migration crisis it faces. The Dutch Prime Minister said we had 6 to 8 weeks to save Schengen. He said that 5 weeks ago. In this chamber, we seem unwilling to accept that the migrant crisis was exacerbated when Chancellor Merkel said Germany would take people without limits, unilaterally defying a number of European rules. And guess what? People are coming without limits. And when some countries, like Hungary, apply the rules and defend the Schengen border, they are criticised. And where other countries break the rules, they are applauded. We cannot begin to solve this crisis until we enforce the rules in place to protect the external Schengen border, to focus on the basics of processing, detention and returns, and to prevent asylum seekers and economic migrants moving around the EU at will. We need international action to end the conflict in Syria. We need to give priority to those refugees already in the camps in Lebanon, Jordan and Turkey, both with humanitarian aid and in offering them refuge. Is it not perverse that the EU gives priority to those who cross the Aegean rather than those already classified as refugees by the United Nations? Mr. Tusk, I recommend that for the next EU summit you order in copious amounts of chips from Maison Antoine and you tell the EU leaders to get cracking.
Herr Fox, ich habe eine...
Mr. Fox, there's a question for you from Mr. Corbett.
Bitte, Herr Corbett.
Delighted to hear Mr. Fox say that he's come off the fence in favour of campaigning to remain in the European Union. We all know that his party is split from head to toe on this question. May I ask him, among the 20 British Conservative MEPs, how many will be campaigning with your party leader, your Prime Minister, to remain in the European Union, and how many will be campaigning with UKIP to get Britain to walk out, slamming the door on all our neighbouring countries?
Bitte sehr.
Well, Mr. President, I think if Mr. Corbett is so interested in the opinions of my colleagues, he should ask them.
Okay. Das Wort hat jetzt für die...
Thank you very much. Next for the Liberal group, Mr. Verhofstadt.
Nevertheless, it was an interesting question by Mr. Corbett, and I think I can add something. Why Mr. Kamal is not...
Herr Verhofstadt, warten Sie mal, Ihre Kollegin...
Mr. Verhofstadt, Madame Goulard also had a question. Or is it a point of order, if I understand correctly? Madame Goulard.
Oui, Monsieur le Président.
Yes, Madam President. It seems to me that this is the European Parliament. And when you take blue cards, my blue card had been in the air for a while, you should look, it's one thing, we should be looking at the questions between British members and other members, rather than British questions, which can take place elsewhere. And I would like to put a question to Mr. Fox, if that's possible.
Liebe Frau Goulard, wir haben die...
Thank you, Madam Goulard. The rule is that the blue cards are not attributed depending on nationality. Mr. Corbett, it so happens, was the first up. And so far, I've always given the blue card question. First come, first served. Mr. Campbell Bannerman had signalled before the speaker spoke.
Natürlich stimmt das.
No, that is the case. How can you claim any difference, Madam?
Bestätigen, Herr Präsident.
Well, colleagues behind me will have seen it. Well, they can see as well as you can, and it clearly was that Mr. Corbett had his hand up first. Had you had your hand up first, you would have been taken for the blue card. Now the chair of your group, Madam, Mr. Verhofstadt.
Going further on the question of Mr. Corbett and Mrs. Goulard, I'm simply wondering, Mr. Fox, why you are now speaking and not Mr. Kamal. I think he is still in doubt and he doesn't know for the moment what he is going to do. And that is a better answer, I think, to the question of Mr. Corbett than saying that they have to ask it themselves. But I have another issue. Involved in these negotiations from the beginning, Mr. Fox, I have asked it always myself why this British deal was so necessary and so vital. And I can tell you, from one thing I'm sure, this deal is not about Europe. And it is a deal to reunite, in fact, the Tory party. Let's be honest about this. And I may not know the result of the referendum, if Britain will remain in the Union, but I'm sure of one result, that is that it will not reunite the Tory party. That is for clear. Because what I'm seeing is a glorified cockfight since Mr. Tusk had reached this deal. Boris Johnson challenging David Cameron. I can tell you, I have seen ambitious politician. I'm myself an ambitious politician, but Boris Johnson takes it to a whole other level. Other level, because it's real the Mayor of London acting against the interests of the citizens of London. And that all for personal ambition and certainly not for a better Europe and for a better Britain. It's totally bonkers, dear colleagues. And it's pathetic, I should say, that it is happening. It's even dramatic for Britain, especially, Mr. Fox. The pound, what we see, is rapidly falling. The unity of the United Kingdom is under threat. And their American cousins are saying, please stop it, we will not make a trade deal with you outside the Union. This, apparently the special relationship between the US and the UK is apparently not so special anymore today. So let me give an advice to those who are doing this now, this debate in Britain. Don't think that after a no, you can come back to the negotiation table. I know that some people are thinking that, saying, it's Europe. Once you have said no in a referendum, you are invited back to the negotiation table, like with Ireland, like with Denmark, like after the constitution with France and the Netherlands. But it's not about the same thing. That was about the constitution, that was about a treaty. Here it's about in or out. It's the one or the other. And if I see how the currency of Britain is endangered, how now Britain is alienated from the US, and how Britain is step by step transformed in Little England, I think they're going to be wise and to stay in the European Union. But, dear colleagues, as pathetic this debate is for the UK, it's also a dramatic debate and an important debate for Europe. Because let's be honest, what we are discussing now is crazy, what we have to unite. We have not to be divided. The only ones who gain from a divided Europe are whom? People like Vladimir Putin, people like Bashar al-Assad, IS, and instead of discussing on how to stand up to them and develop a strategy, what we are showing for the moment is division. We are weak. And yesterday it became again very clear when the Russian-American plan for ceasefire in Syria happened, and we were again not around the table for such a crucial decision. So we can continue now, and some are doing it, to complain about the deal and point out to the downsides of the deal. My appeal, Mr. President, to Mr. Tusk, to you and to everybody in this House is to do the opposite. Let's use the deal to put Europe back on track and to make Europe work again. Let's finally stop the Europe à la carte and stop the standstill because of the British issue. I have nothing, Mr. Fox, against giving a special status to Britain. If next time you agree also that in the next treaty revision we can also go ahead in our integration. In all these reforms we are needed to establish a more united Europe. Because we need it to tackle the multiple crises we are facing today, and certainly the refugee crisis. And that's my last point. That is that we should do more also on this refugee crisis. Do as much efforts, Mr. Tusk, to solve the refugee crisis as we have done to give a solution for the Brexit. Thank you.
So, Herr Verhofstadt,
Thank you. There are 7 people, Mr. Verhofstadt, wishing to put their questions to you. 7. I know your furious colleague has now left the chamber. 7, most from one country. The first colleague wishing to put a question is Mrs. JAAKONSAARI from Finland. So that's a Finnish member putting a question to a Belgian group leader here in the European Parliament.
Mr. President, thank you for the floor. I would like to make a question to Mr. Verhofstadt whom I know to be a good speaker and a passionate European, I would like to put the same question to you as you put to Mr. Fox. Are you aware of the fact that also people from your group, even Finns, campaign for the Brexit? Thank you.
I cannot see the interest of a Finn campaigning for a Brexit. I like it more interesting that it is the British people who are deciding and that the British politicians are taking position. And I can tell you one thing, if there is one party in the UK who's going to fight that Britain remain in the Union, it's going to be the Liberal Democratic movement, and them alone.
Das Wort hat jetzt für die Frage.
Now for the GUE group, Mrs. Zimmer, please.
President, ladies and gentlemen, the result of an internal party squabble took the EU so far that an essential pillar which supported the EU edifice, the social pillar, has been reduced. What will happen with the AAA, Mr. Juncker? Surely you can pack up and say that was it, all promises are lost. And I would make the point to you too, we're en route for the EU coming closer to the radical market Anglo-Saxon model. You could erect a monument saying on the 18th of February 2016 the spirit of Margaret Thatcher was resurrected. You could put a monument in Brussels to that effect. Hundreds of thousands of people in the last few months have come into Greece, and the EU is refusing to enter into its commitment to redistribute those people, to resettle them. You've got the fact that the unanimous decision of the last summit has disappeared, and you haven't criticised that. A day after the summit, no one was talking about it anymore. Borders were sealed off. It was agreed that by the summit in March we should still have open borders and a common decision. And now we've got a conference underway in Vienna excluding Greece, the main player. How do we intend to come to a European solution? I've had no hint of criticism to what's going on in Vienna from Council or Commission. And you made the point yourself, Mr. Juncker, what we decided needs to be delivered. That would be the first precondition for the quotas being allocated and Greece being helped. We need a legal route to be created. Greece needs tangible help. We can't go on as if individual member states were left alone. Member states are duty bound to shoulder their responsibilities. This is a human duty. We will be giving up our values if we refuse to do that. So let me say it loud and clear. Should we take an example from the new Portuguese government, the offer from Costa to Cyprus that thousands of migrants could be taken by them, or the Spanish province of Valencia, which offered help to a Greek province in taking 1,000 immigrants. Why can't other member states help? That would be the way forward. That's the basis on which we should discuss it now. It shouldn't be power play between Johnson and Cameron, which has no impact on me or the refugees whatsoever. That's what we should be talking about. 24 hours of drama in Brussels, staged drama, whereas the real drama is happening elsewhere and we are doing nothing. We are not reacting. We are acting as if that could all be resolved on its own. Ladies and gentlemen, I say that we need to act together, we need to form a majority and spell out loud and clear just what is needed.
Mrs. Zimmer, there's a question from Madame Martin to you. Sorry, I do apologize, Mr. Martin.
Wo ist er? Bitte sehr. Ja.
Oui, merci, Président.
Yes, thank you very much, President. I was listening very carefully to Ms. Zimmer, who was asking for the refugees arriving in Greece to be redistributed within Europe. That would be a drama in itself. My question is very simple. Why do you want the refugees to be distributed within Europe only? Why can't that resettlement happen throughout all of the countries across the planet, particularly in the countries around the outside?
Sehr verehrter Herr Kollege.
Dear colleague, we are members of the European Parliament. We are here because we were elected to this post by our voters, and we have to resolve the problems that relate to Europe. People are coming to Europe, whether you want it, whether others want it or not. They are coming. And it doesn't help to try and close off borders. It doesn't happen to try to recreate internal borders within the European Union, and it's us that have to solve this. We can't look elsewhere and say, you do this. We have the key to solving this problem, and we have to work together to open the European door in such a way as to ensure this problem is resolved without threatening the lives of the people en route and complying with the international law as set out in the European Parliament. Thank you.
Fraktion der Grünen, Frau.
Now for the Greens, Mrs. Harms, please.
Mr. President, colleagues, Ms. Gabi Zimmer, of course, politics is always staged to a certain extent, but at this last European Council meeting, I didn't think it was just a cheap staged drama. I got the impression, actually, that Donald Tusk has described things correctly, that behind the scenes there was a really serious negotiation going on, and under no circumstances should we consider this negotiation to be something that was planned in advance. It was actually a very difficult negotiation to keep Europe together. My impression from the summit, and of course I was only watching from the sidelines, but my impression was that this summit saw many members of Council looking around at what was at stake and were making it very clear what actually would happen if one of the older members of the European Union were to leave the Union. And I hope, I have to say this against the doomsayers that are speaking out very loudly in this Parliament, I hope that the conflict in the UK on this question actually helps the UK decide what they want to get out of the European Union, what they want the European Union to be, and that will help all of us in Europe as a result of that discussion to acknowledge exactly what we have in the European Union, because this has been an ongoing construction for decades. People died in the making of this European Union, particularly in the eastern countries, and in the last few weeks we've seen the beginnings of what could lay it asunder. Now, as Mr. Farage has weighed in on this matter on several occasions, I can only imagine what he has to say on this debate, but this process in the United Kingdom could end up being a process which does us all good in acknowledging what we have here. It's been described often enough, but the European Union has become rather sidelined in many of the large world conflicts. The USA has mentioned this on several occasions. They don't necessarily want to just help us out of any difficulty regardless anymore, and in the Ukraine conflict we saw very clearly what will happen to us if we can't find common solutions together. And if you look at the new strategy being adopted by the Kremlin and the conflicts arising in various places around the world, I think it's very clear that we have to work together with the United Kingdom. The European Union will be better with the UK on board, but it works the other way around as well. The United Kingdom can overcome these crises better if they are in the European Union. Now, unfortunately, the issue of the refugee crisis was only dealt with very briefly. Now, Mr. Juncker has said it was an extremely difficult issue to come to an agreement on, and this is not just the case for the refugee crisis. We're seeing a domino effect as a result of our inability to get to grips on this refugee crisis. Borders are being brought back in all over Europe, and people are even talking about defending the borders militarily. Now, regarding the summit with Turkey, I would say those who want to enshrine a fair refugee policy in the European Union, a genuinely fair approach to dealing with those who are in most need in Syria and around Syria, I hope that those people have great success in the negotiations, because the topics are still the same as they always were. Resettlement within the European Union, it should be feasible, because if you look at the actual figures involved, it's still feasible. Better border management, it will cost a lot of money, but it's important, and it has to be done on the basis of law. NATO can intervene, yes, but they can't patrol the external borders of the European Union, and the major support for these refugees is being given by Jordan, by Turkey, and that can't continue to be the case. So thank you very much for your patience and your attention. Thank you, President.
Thank you very much. Mr. Arnott wanted to ask a question. Do you agree?
None of the fear tactics or scaremongering that we've seen from Mr. Verhofstadt, so thank you. I think you're giving the EU a lot of credit for things that it hasn't done, but you mentioned the deal, and look, in my view, the deal, we've got rid of the words ever closer union, which never had legal force, and we've got this emergency brake that's not clear how it's going to be applied and misunderstands the problem. So my question to you is, can you think of any other concrete example of anything that Cameron's actually achieved in this deal?
No, but sorry, you mentioned what was the most urgent idea, yeah, this break, huh? And this emergency break, it's in. And I can tell you, so I'm always open to compromise. Europe is always about compromise. Everything we move by compromise. But in the long run, I will never agree that, for example, workers coming from the Eastern European states are seen as second-class workers. And I hope that you agree with me on this.
Thank you very much. Now for the EFDD group, Mr. Farage.
Really rather exciting, isn't it? It's referendum season, and the referendum is coming on the 6th of April in the Netherlands, where they're going to have a referendum on the Ukrainian deal, and the opinion polls show they are going to reject it. And just today, Mr. Orban has announced there is going to be a referendum in Hungary, where they're going to have a referendum on whether they should be forced to accept mandatory quotas for migrants after the grievous errors of the EU's common asylum policy, not to mention Mrs. Merkel's pronouncements. And overnight we get a Czech premier telling us that there is now demand building in the Czech Republic to have a referendum on membership. Oh, and I nearly forgot, there's going to be a British referendum on June the 23rd on whether we remain or leave the European Union. And this follows a 40-hour summit where Mr. Cameron, doing his modern-day impression of Oliver Twist, went up to Mr. Tusk and said, "Please, sir, can I have some more concessions?" Well, he didn't get very much, did he? We're allowed to change ever so slightly migrant benefits for a short period of time, and we're told that in future we won't be committed to ever closer union. And on the basis of all of that, we're going to have a referendum that the Prime Minister says on a deal that is legally binding. And indeed, Mr. Tusk joined in with this today by saying the British deal was legally binding. To top that off, Mr. Cameron has told us that he will lodge the deal, he will lodge the documents at the United Nations. But frankly, you might as well lodge an old pair of socks because it's completely meaningless. The fact that you lodge a document there, you could use a safety deposit box. But is this deal legally binding, Mr. Tusk? Well, the ECJ themselves said in 2008 that the obligations imposed by an international agreement cannot have the effect of prejudicing the constitutional principles of the EU treaties, which means the ECJ rule in favour of the existing treaties until we get a new treaty. But who's to say there's going to be a new treaty? Any new treaty would trigger yet more referendums and would not be favoured, I think, by the big groups in this Parliament. But of course we have an emergency brake. That's being judged to be a great success. But, crucially, that happens through secondary legislation that can be voted on by this Parliament. So what happens? We have a referendum, we follow Mr Cameron, we vote to remain, and then we come back to this Parliament. Is this Parliament going to support British exceptionalism? And I think we've heard voices today that make it perfectly clear that that will not happen. So the deal, Mr Tusk, and Mr Cameron, if you're listening, is not legally binding in any way at all. And I have to say the British public will decide which is our safest option. Is it safe to stay within an organisation whose own police boss tells us there are 3,000 to 5,000 terrorists that have now come into our continent through the migrant crisis, or is it safest to take back control of our own borders and our own democracy? After much consideration, I have decided to opt to vote for us to leave.
Herr Farage, es gibt eine...
Thank you, Mr Farage. There is a question from Mr CASA. Do you want to, will you accept that? Mr CASA, please.
Oops. Thank you, Mr Chairman. Well, we all know that Mr Farage has been working for Britain to leave since I joined here in Parliament 11 years ago. He has tried local elections in the United Kingdom, but he didn't have any success, did he? Then he went for the general elections in the United Kingdom, hardly a success there. On the contrary, he secured a bigger majority for David Cameron and the Conservative Party. Now, if in the referendum, which he always wanted, the majority of the British people say yes, meaning to stay part of us in the European Union, will he call it a day and retire from politics? Or would he want another chance to stay here, enjoying the company of us Europeans?
Well, Mr Kaza, I don't know who's been briefing you on UKIP's electoral history. You perhaps haven't got a very good memory, I'm not sure. But in 2014, with 28% of the vote, UKIP won the European elections, topping the poll across the United Kingdom, the first time since 1906 that a party that wasn't Labour or the Conservatives had won a national election. So I hope that brings you up to speed. As for the referendum, yeah, I believe it is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I'm certain that if we vote to remain, we're unlikely ever to get another opportunity, and we will sink deeper inside this political union. But I think there's every chance now that the momentum is on our side of the argument, and so yes, we're going to vote to leave, and within a short period of time, all the British MEPs will be gone. How about that?
Für die ENF-Fraktion.
Thank you. For the ENF group now, Madame Le Pen. Careful with the predicting the results, the analyses of respective countries. I think that the Socialists went down to 22% in the last elections and no one resigned that I can remember. Honourable members, 4 months' time, the UK will vote, the Britons will vote in or out. And it's for the people to decide on a fundamental issue, and it's perfectly legitimate, and it shows the vitality of British democracy, unlike France. Not all the media are unanimously pro-European, and there will be a real democratic debate. There will be many ideas will be involved in the cut and thrust. Now, freedom of opinion and respect for all opinions. That goes to the heart of democracy. And Brexit is for the UK an opportunity to look back and measure the benefits of joining up way back in '76. If they decide that it's wanting, they can opt for freedom, for sovereignty, and if they do that, they'll find the ways of solving the problems of the modern world. Now, if you think back to Article 28 of the Charter of Human Rights, a generation cannot subjugate to its laws future generations. A generation of the British decided to join the European Union. That generation can now not impose on European institutions cannot impose our institutions to future generations. And that's a lesson of democracy, and it has full legitimacy. European Union imposes innumerable rules and treaties on successive generations, but decisions, those are taken by unelected people, usually without proper democratic debate and without it having even been had out in the media. That's the opposite of those who are ruled, and this is a kind of tyranny arriving legally in power, but then making an illegal and violent use of it. A travesty of an agreement is not going to change that cruel reality any more than threats or blackmail which are proliferating on the margins of the system, nor the polls taken by Mr. Soros used by Mr. Weber, who clearly prefers polls to referenda. You cannot refuse to be judged by the people and, if necessary, sanctioned and penalised by punished by them, because that's the very essence of the quintessence of democracy. And I believe that the punishment for you will be brutal, because the recompense for the British people will be freedom.
Das Wort hat jetzt die
And Mrs. Dodds, please.
As we in the United Kingdom look towards our very own Independence Day on the 23rd of June, we do so knowing that despite the best efforts of our Prime Minister to deliver change, the EU is neither willing nor able to do so. The new settlement promised to us in 2013 by David Cameron has been ditched. Our sovereignty will continue to be eroded and our security will continue to be at risk. We will continue to send billions more to the EU than we get back, and the fundamental flaws of membership will remain. But, Mr. President, even if we look at the mediocre tweaks being hailed by those advocating Remain, they bring with them no guarantees. There will be no guarantee of treaty change. This Parliament can unravel the deal, as can the ECJ. What we have before us is a charade, an attempt to deceive the British people with a pig-in-the-poke deal. My message to my constituents is, don't buy it. Believe in our United Kingdom, because in the words of that wonderful Belfast-born author, there are far, far better things ahead than any we leave behind.
Okay. Mrs. Dodds, you have two blue cards. Would you accept them? First is from Mrs. McGuinness.
Thank you, Mr. President. Could I ask Mrs. Dodds if she would acknowledge the role of the European Union in the peace process in Northern Ireland, because it did create a space for those who were in disagreement, to put it mildly, to actually negotiate. And therefore, does she not see the value of the European Union in peace work generally, but in particular in Northern Ireland? And while we cannot interfere in the UK referendum, I, as a neighbour of yours on the island of Ireland, we do have to have a say, and our voices need to be heard. And I hope you'll accept that. Thank you.
Can I say thank you to Mrs. McGuinness for her question. It is indeed a very relevant one, and I have always acknowledged the role that this place this Parliament and these institutions have built have made in making sure that there were peace funds available to Northern Ireland. However, Open Europe, for example, has estimated that in terms of structural funds, for every pound that Northern Ireland gets back, it costs us £1.58. In terms of good relationships with our neighbours in the Irish Republic, of course I welcome that today we have much better relationships than we have ever had before, and I hope and know that this will continue. And can I make a plea to Mrs McGuinness, to her Taoiseach and any future Prime Minister, that what we need in Northern Ireland is a genuine and honest debate, and not the scaremongering tactics that we have so far seen of those who threaten us with all kinds of things in Northern Ireland if we don't toe the European line.
Well, thank you very much. I will inform you that I am sticking to the precedent created by Mr. Schulz and accept only one blue card per speaker. So therefore I would ask for your indulgence with the rest who have asked for blue cards. Thank you very much. So now we move to Mr. Reul, 1 minute and 30 seconds.
Herr Präsident, Kommission.
President, Commission President, President of Council, in the last debate on the situation in Europe and the Council, I heard very strong criticism of the fact that in Council it was just selfish people putting their own interests first and squabbling. I think it's appropriate then to say that this last summit was one that proved things could go differently. I'm very satisfied and very happy that in the last summit the Council finally took decisions and demonstrated that the most difficult questions could be resolved. Thank you to Mr. Tusk, the President, and all those who worked on it. This is finally the proof of the pudding that Europe can act even on the most difficult questions. And I think Mrs. Harms made the point very rightly. Not only in the UK, the public is becoming aware about how significant and important the European project is and can become. If that serves us realising how important that project in Europe is in Council and Parliament, then we ought to be able to reach very difficult compromises on a number of issues. So I think this is a very valuable lesson and offers new opportunities for Europe. I do hope, particularly this is true on refugees. It's not the Chancellor alone who invited the refugees in. Much as I esteem you, Mr. Fox, it's a huge problem with lots of ramifications, and it can't be resolved on its own. The decisions last weekend can be the starting point for solving such big issues. And if we don't do that, we'll all experience a disaster.
Now I'm asking Mrs. WILLMOTT to take the floor for 3 minutes.
Colleagues, we could use this debate to discuss the details of the deal struck last Friday, but that would be to miss the point. The deal was done, and now the clock is ticking. And while the summit has given the British Prime Minister what he needed to speak out, finally, loud and clear in favour of our EU membership, it's not Friday's deal that is on the ballot paper for the UK referendum. The question facing the British people is far more significant than anything that can be agreed over a very late breakfast in Brussels. It's about the very future of Britain as an outward-looking global player. It's about the future of Europe at a time when we need international cooperation to face the challenges of an uncertain world. For too long, politicians in Britain have shied away from the big arguments about Europe. We've allowed debate to be dominated by those on the other side of the chamber and by those who are willing to stoke fear and divide communities to drive forward their ideological agenda, by those who go heavy on the rhetoric and bluster but are in short supply of actual answers when asked about their alternatives to Britain holding its head high as an active and leading member of the EU. Colleagues, it is time we called out those who claim to speak for Britain, but who in truth represent only a fraction of the British people.
It is time we called out those who claim to be making a patriotic case, but who argue a course of action that will diminish our country's standing in the world. It's time we called out those who claim to care about working people, but are pushing for the choice that means less job security and fewer working rights. That is why Labour is already out there, going from door to door, street to street, making the case, not just for Britain to remain a member of the EU, but to be, once again, a leading player in Europe. Thanks to campaigning by Labour and the trade unions, we've been able to block early efforts by the Tories to weaken workers' rights as part of their negotiations. And those rights to paid holiday, equal pay, a safe place to work will feature front and centre of our campaign to remain. And we will be making a positive case about Britain's place in the world, about the fact that, on everything from the environment to the economy, Britain is stronger when working together with its European partners. There is still much we can do to make Europe work better for our constituents. Nobody should be under any illusion. After the referendum is won, after the legislation agreed at this summit is passed, our job of reforming Europe is not done. But for Britain to have an influence on this process, we must have a seat at the table. So, for Britain and for Europe, we will fight with every breath to win.
Thank you very much. Mrs. WILLMOTT, would you accept a blue card from the Earl of Dartmouth? Yes.
Thank you very much for taking the blue card. Of course, in the British general election, which was just a few months ago, the Labour manifesto opposed there being a referendum on Brexit. Do you support the principle of there being a referendum, or are you still opposed to there being a referendum? And if you support there being a referendum, why have you changed your mind?
I think that's irrelevant. We are having a referendum. Whether we like it or not, we're there. What we've got to do is ensure that we fight for the future of the British people. And the future of the British people is a strong Britain in a strong Europe. It's strong for our economy, it's strong for our security, it's strong for jobs, investment, and it's strong for workers' rights.
Thank you very much. Now, Mrs. in 't Veld, 1 minute.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I always like to cite from my favourite television programme, Yes, Prime Minister. In particular, the episode where Sir Humphrey says, "Minister, Britain has had the same foreign policy objective for at least the last 500 years, to create a disunited Europe. In that cause, we have fought with the Dutch against the Spanish, with the Germans against the French, with the French and Italians against the Germans, and with the French against the Germans and the Italians. Divide and rule, you see. Why should we change now, when it's worked so well?" Well, as a Dutch liberal and as a European, I would say, let's prove Sir Humphrey wrong on June the 23rd. Dear British friends, we want you in. We need you in. And not because of some vague deal, but because only with a strong, united Europe we can respond to the challenges of the 21st century. Refugees, terrorism, climate change, the energy crisis, and only together we can make the lives of our citizens better by seizing the fantastic opportunities of the internet era and the global economy. Let's build our future together, friends. Vote in on June 23rd. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now, Mrs. Anderson for 1 minute and 30 seconds.
Thank you. Pushing workers beyond the poverty line because of their nationality is not the way to keep Britain in the EU. Vague promises of competitiveness and semantic victories on an ever closer union won't satisfy the thirst of the Eurosceptics. You could hear it here today. Without doubt, the EU is far from perfect. It's too distant from citizens. It lumbers on with a staggering democratic deficit and drains power from where it should reside, which is, without doubt, national parliaments. But the EU does offer fundamental protections in the fields of workers, consumers and human rights. It presents opportunities for progressive forces to unite. It has supported the Irish peace process and projects aimed at reducing the impact of the border through Interreg and peace funding, with examples like the footbridge uniting Pedigo into County Donegal and Tullyhanna in Fermanagh. Much needed structural and agricultural funds have made a huge and a positive impact on the north of Ireland, and there are thousands of constituents with no faith in a British government replacing those funds post-Brexit. For these reasons, Sinn Féin will campaign vigorously against a Brexit. Ireland's place is in Europe, north and south. Go míle maith go léir.
Well, thank you very much. Now, Mrs. Evans, 1 minute and 30 seconds.
Thank you, President. Colleagues, diolch yn fawr. In Wales, this is a time of intense political debate, because prior to the EU referendum in June, we have elections in May for a new Welsh Government and Assembly. And we are talking about how to build a strong and a sustainable economy and thriving communities. And for me, the messages go hand in hand. My party, Plaid Cymru, the Party of Wales, believes that Wales's natural home is in Europe, and we will be campaigning to ensure that our successful relationship and partnership flourishes in future. Wales benefits from EU membership, economically, socially and culturally. We want a stronger voice for Wales in Europe, and we'll continue to work for that. But this referendum is about the bigger picture. It's about the kind of nation we want Wales to be, and for the kind of Europe that we want for the future, where we in Wales, like other countries, can contribute to building a fairer and a better society. So our message is a positive one. We believe it's in the interests of all our people, our rural and our urban areas, our workers and companies, and most of all for our young people, for us to remain in the European Union. Because we have to remember that this is a choice we are making, not just for ourselves, but for future generations as well.
Now, Mr. de Graaf, 1 minute.
Voorzitter. President, the opinion polls tell us that a majority of the British population want the United Kingdom to leave the European Union. The European Union is clearly disregarding the will of the people and democracy. Everything is being done in order to avoid that happening. And that's why we get this settlement, this agreement. The UK gets not a millimetre of sovereignty back. And it's clear who's running, who's being operated by the strings coming from the European Commission. Surely countries should be able to be boss in their own country. This is an historic chance for the UK. The Netherlands, 53% want an exit. And that should also be called, so that the EU can be cooperating sovereign countries with more freedom and more prosperity and welfare. Thank you.
Oh, Mr. Voigt, 1 minute.
Yes, thank you very much, President. Today we've heard a great deal about what doesn't work and what hasn't been implemented, and in the meantime the promises of billions to Turkey hasn't been brought forward either. Now, regardless of how many billions you give to Turkey, you can't imagine that Turkey will actually change anything. They will act in their own interests and continue to destabilize Greece, not add to stability. Now, will this be the last straw for the EU? A lot of people have talked about the catastrophic consequences that would result from a Brexit. Well, I think that catastrophic consequences are not the best way to describe that eventuality. If Brexit happens, then there will be hope again in Europe, because we won't have an integration of differing cultures that hate each other. We'll actually get a union of free and sovereign nations.
Madame Grossette, 1 minute and 30 seconds.
Oui, merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Mr. President. Might I paraphrase a former French president whose words ring true now? Our house is on fire and our gaze is elsewhere. Okay, we don't have the same priorities. 48 hours of discussions, no real progress on the migration crisis, at a time when thousands of desperate people are fleeing to our continent, to our shores. All of this seems somehow indecent. And in order to prevent Brexit, our countries are able to agree by miracle to save the political skin of Cameron and open up the Pandora's box of Europe à la carte, short-circuiting the European project. Our fellow citizens are hoping that we in Europe can face up to the migrant flows, can fight back against dumping of Chinese steel, can hold our own against the assert ourselves vis-à-vis the Americans as well. And can one member state take all 27 other member states hostage? Solidarity and European project, that's what we've got to do. Political instability, economic instability, social instability, environmental instability worldwide condemn us to be united. We want the UK to be with us. The ball is in their court, and the UK must know that there will be no other negotiations. And what is important is that member states have got to be firemen and not pyromaniacs.
Madame Grossetête, vous avez une carte bleue.
Madame Grossetête, you have a blue card if you accept. Do you accept? Monsieur Le Breton. Yes, thank you very much, Mr. President. Madame Grossetête, you say Brexit is going to lead to economic and political instability in Europe, but we know that the Frankfurt Bourse has just decided to enter an agreement with the London Stock Exchange. Is this not proof that Brexit won't be a break on the business world, and that the UK can find its freedom again without doing it any damage whatsoever? The gentleman hasn't listened correctly to me. I did not say that Brexit was going to lead to political instability. I said that political, economic, social, environmental instability worldwide means that all of us have to be united. And that's why it's essential that 500 million European citizens together can face up to globalization. That's why we need the UK in our midst. But if you look at the collapse of the Bourse in London, I don't think that what you said is strictly true.
Now, Mr. Guerrero, for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, President. Well, we know what's going to happen in 4 months' time in the United Kingdom. I just hope that the decision will be to remain within the European Union. However, what we're seeing day to day in the streets of the European Union is that as a result of successive crises, the threat of insecurity and Brexit, we're forgetting that we're living in an ongoing, permanent situation of employment crises, in unemployment and low salaries. The fact that last week the Eurozone is growing 1.4%, Germany 1.3%, France 1.2%, Italy 1.1%. These are the growth rates which demonstrate that we're not in a position to be able to respond properly to the crises which are currently jeopardizing the future of the European Union. Now, all of this is happening in a framework of exceptional monetary policies taking place, very good exchange rates and raw material prices. The problem is that there is no expansive fiscal policy, which is what's required at the moment in the European Union. The OECD itself is asking for more ambitious approaches to fiscal policy, more ambitious plans, both in the medium, short and long terms. What we're seeing is not a Keynesian conspiracy that's overtaken the OECD and a series of socialists imposing their will. It's simply common sense and drawing upon experience over the last few years. So that's why we're asking for the Juncker plan to be implemented with greater enthusiasm to ensure that investment banks in Europe can take on more risk. When we're talking about integration and the current crisis. We're just talking about trying to contain the problems, but we're not actually addressing the root cause of the crises. President Juncker has said that we need to implement what's already been approved. We think that this is pretty ironic. Hopefully in March we'll actually try to apply these things.
To accept a blue card from Mrs. Atkinson. Yep.
I don't know.
Mr Guerrero, as a socialist, do you actually buy into what David Cameron has put on the table? So we have a two-speed Europe, but your citizens across the Eastern European states, Poland, Romania and others that come to our countries to work are treated as second-class citizens. Because if Cameron gets a change to the treaties, and let's bear in mind he has to get a change to the treaties, then your citizens can't come to my country and claim in-work benefits. Now, I don't believe in second-class citizens. I believe if you're going to buy into the EU, that you should be buying into it wholesale, not having an option to opt out. Is your socialist group going to accept this two-speed and second-class Europe?
Well, I think that the parliamentary group leader who spoke and the head of the Labour Party in the European Parliament, Ms WILLMOTT, have made this issue very, very clear. We believe in a European Union which is strong. We believe in a European Union which is integrated, and a European Union which respects each and every fundamental right of each and every citizen of the European Union.
Now, Mr. TELIČKA, 1 minute.
Ladies and gentlemen, I come from a country which was for 40 years outside the integration process, not because of our own will, but because things have turned out like that after the Second World War. Well, it's up for the Brits to judge, but I can tell you that it's a hell of a difference whether you are inside the European Union or outside, with all the imperfectness, with all the weaknesses, with all the difficulties, with all the disagreements. But it is for our British colleague to judge. I can only say that we want the UK in. We need the UK in, and that is why an agreement which I do find problematic in a number of provisions, I'm ready to accept, I'm ready to pay that price, I'm ready to sacrifice. On a second and a related point, this cannot be the end. This has to be the start of reforms that the European Union badly needs. In a number of areas, some of them are on the agenda today, some of them are yet to come. Final remark, and that is on migration, President Tusk. If you look at the European Council conclusions, and I know you have put a lot of effort into it, but this is not what will deliver. March has to be the month when we will deliver on concretes and where the first fruits will really come so that the citizens will understand and believe that we are on the right track. Thank you.
TELIČKA, now Mr. Flanagan, 1 minute and 30 seconds.
Thank you very much. Millions of people of Irish descent will vote in the Brexit referendum. I suggest they listen to what I have to say here and judge the way they vote depending on how I get answered. Mr Juncker, who couldn't even be bothered to stay in the chamber, at the last plenary I asked, would you work with us towards lifting the unjust, unfair 31 billion promissory note burden that had been placed on our shoulders? I quoted the fact that the banking inquiry in Ireland had pointed the finger directly at the ECB, had found that successive Irish governments had in fact been bullied into accepting debt that could have been avoided. You didn't even reply. Since then, the Supreme Court in Ireland has been hearing an appeal by a Member of Parliament into the constitutionality of those notes. In its defence, the state argued that the moment the notes were issued, they weren't just a promise of billions to what even then was an insolvent and non-systemic bank, they were in fact capital that was raised from the ELA fund. This was a blatant violation of its rules, as the fund was only to be used for solvent institutions. And yet it was sanctioned by the ECB. Why? Because it feared contagion. Mr Juncker, wherever you are, 31 billion more than the entire combined tax take of Ireland in 2010 was put into this. Would Britain put up with it? Would Luxembourg put up with it? Would France put up with it? To the Irish living in Britain, why aren't these questions being answered? So far, my conclusion is because they don't bloody well care in here. Unless it changes, vote to leave Irish people in Britain. Thank you very much.
Okay. So now, Ms. Scott, 1 minute and 30 seconds.
Thank you very much, President.
Excuse me, I didn't see the blue card from Mr. Tannock. So would you accept the blue card from Mr. Tannock? Mr. Flanagan, would you accept the blue card from Mr. Tannock? Okay, Mr. Tannock. Mic.
The Irish citizens who reside in the rest of the United Kingdom, including in my country, England. I find it extraordinary, really, you should be saying that. I don't see how that's possibly going to help you or your cause in terms of the Irish Republic and its debt overhang in the banking system. Are you advocating then that your country leaves the European Union and rejoins the United Kingdom and rejoins the sterling zone? Is that the logic of what you're saying? And what do you say to the fact if there is a vote leave, there will be a customs border between the Northern Ireland, which is part of the United Kingdom, and the Republic, which will impede trade, which will put more burdens economically on the Republic? So how do you account for that? How is that going to help prosperity and jobs in the south, in the Republic, if there is a customs border which will actually stop the flow between Northern Ireland, which will still be in the United Kingdom, outside of the European Union, and your country, which will still be in the European Union and in the customs union?
Thank you. So, Mr. Flanagan.
It is ironic, given that I said the Irish people weren't being listened to, that you didn't actually listen to what I said as an Irish MEP. What I said was that unless we get decent answers on this, because we were robbed, €500 million on 3 occasions this year has been borrowed and burned because of this. What I am saying is, if the Irish people don't get listened to here, they should take that into account. The ones that live in Britain, some of them who had to leave during this crisis, some of them in their 20s, 250,000 people from Ireland had to leave. That if we don't get an answer, what else can you conclude but that the European Union doesn't listen? Well, of course, unless it's bringing in right-wing policies like impoverishing poor people even further.
Thank you very much. And now, Mrs. Scott, for real.
I'm here for real. Greens want Britain to remain part of the EU because we believe that we need to work together on shared solutions to the collective challenges that we face. Climate change, the pollution of our oceans, terrorism and the refugee crisis show no respect for borders and require collaborative and cooperative solutions. So far, the debate about whether our future lies in Europe or not has been dominated by middle-aged men in suits. But this was the boring part, like the trailers and the adverts that you have to sit through before you get to the film you came to watch. The main feature is starting now, and we all get a starring role and everybody gets an equal say. Personally, I share the concerns of those who believe that European politics has sometimes run ahead of what people in the UK and in other parts of Europe as a whole are comfortable with. But I still believe the European story should be celebrated, a story of different peoples and cultures working together for the common good. We all know that the EU is not perfect, but we need to stay in it to transform it. The referendum campaign is a chance to have a conversation about how another Europe is possible. Let's talk about how corporate influence can be curtailed and the institutions of the EU can be made more democratic and accountable to the citizens of Europe. It's a unique opportunity to re-establish a Europe by the people and for the people.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Scott. Now, Mr. Wilimski, 1 minute.
Danke sehr, Herr Präsident, meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. On the 23rd of June, despite all of this joy, people will be deciding for themselves democratically. And in the Netherlands, there is a democratic majority for a referendum. In my country, in Austria, there is a great deal of dissatisfaction with the European Union, and against that backdrop, I wonder why it's not possible in a continent where democracy was born, whether we're talking about Iceland or Greece, the historians can squabble over which is the actual cradle. Surely there is nothing more apposite for democracy in every state and system to have the people in charge. It's not us, ladies and gentlemen, as politicians, but it's the sovereign will of the people that is in charge. And Europe will only make a step forwards if it manages once again to draw the people back into the democratic process rather than leaving them outside of it. Thank you.
Mr. Korwin-Mikke, 1 minute.
Thank you. Mr. Donald Tusk said that he cares about the free flow of people in Europe, but he forgot that the United Kingdom is not part of Schengen. Well, Ireland did provide help for Charles Marx even, but did not pay him benefits. We do need a common economy, but we don't need a band of officials who will be debating about the gorillas in Congo. If the British heard these debates, 90% of them would be voting for Brexit, which is why I hope that the United Kingdom leave the European Union and come back to the European Association of Free Trade, followed then by Poland, Slovakia, the Czech Republic and other countries. And on top of it, I believe that the EU must be destroyed.
Thank you very much. Mr. Korwin-Mikke, would you accept a blue card from Mr. Bonanno? Yes, please, Mr. Bonanno.
Thank you. I heard the intervention by our colleague, and can I ask if there was a magic wand and you were in the position of Mr. Juncker or Mr. Tusk, what would you do immediately? What would be the first thing you would do with your magic wand?
Repeat your question, the second part of your question. What I would do if what?
Okay.
No, I was saying, having listened to you speaking, having listened to the gentleman speaking a moment ago, something occurred to me. And I was asking, if you had a magic wand, like in the fairy tales, you wake up tomorrow morning, and instead of Juncker, you were in Juncker's place or Tusk's place, what would be your first wish with your magic wand to change Europe?
I would announce the end of the European Union, if I could.
Fortunately, we live in a real world. Mr. Gonzalez, 1 minute and 30 seconds. Mike, please.
Señor Presidente, el acuerdo. President, the agreement with the United Kingdom was not what we wanted, but it was what was possible. We did everything we could so that we didn't lose everything. But we don't win out with this. It's not a step forward. The generation that went through 2 world wars and its consequences is now dying off. Fewer Europeans now remember the Second World War and its consequences, and that is dangerous, because we built Europe so that we could overcome these national divisions, and now we don't want European leaders to use national divisions to win elections. There was a war and we built Europe, and let's not disassemble Europe. Let's not forget our past and return to nationalism and populism. We've talked a great deal about external threats, but the real threat to the European Union is from within. Since 1939, we haven't seen this kind of populism and nationalism. This threat is coming from within. Let us not submit to it. Now, it's up to the UK to choose, but England, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, together or separately, need the European Union much more than because it's very cold on the outside of the European Union. And just allow me to say one thing by way of conclusion. In the referendum, the British will have to decide yes or no, but I want to say one thing very clearly. Europe, regardless of what the British do, will continue, because we can continue to the European Union even without the English in the room. Thank you.
2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. President. The settlement that has been negotiated and unanimously agreed by all 28 member states is, I think, a fair and balanced deal. And I think that all the institutions have to be proud that the EU has been able to deliver timely. The settlement recognises that the UK can continue to benefit of the single market without being bound to the principle of ever closer union and to further political integration, while this principle remains fully valid for the others. The settlement guarantees against the discrimination of the pound, and at the same time it is fully in line with the treaties and with the need of preserving a level playing field across the single market and within the single rule book. Furthermore, the settlement recognises at the same time the need for further euro area integration. For these reasons, if the British citizens will decide to stay, we will examine the Commission proposal with the highest respect, and we will respect the agreement, and we will not prevent nor delay its implementation. Of course, legally speaking, the European Parliament can only formally speak in appropriate procedure on the basis of the Commission proposal. But politically speaking, I think that this debate clearly shows that the settlement commands a broad majority in this House. So we will be fair, we will keep our word. Now it is time for the British citizens to safeguard their prosperity and their future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, Mrs. Bearder, 1 minute.
I'd like to thank the EU leaders for their tolerance for yet more British demands. They recognise the importance of a deal for Mr Cameron, but mostly for his own party. Now the battle begins. The referendum is underway, but it is not yet safely won. We've been fed lies and scare stories over 20 years from a largely foreign-owned media and comical characters such as Mr Farage. The stakes could not be higher. People I speak to want to know their future will be prosperous, stable and secure. Staying in Europe is the best way to guarantee that. Businesses know access to the world's largest single market far outweighs any free trade deals. But the work of the EU is so much more. It's migration, climate change, terrorists, all these. We must work together on these issues. Those calling for EU exit are like lemmings running to the cliff's edge, but they can't tell us what is on the other side. That's not patriotic, it's idiotic. Let's remain in together with a Britain to be proud to hand on to our future generations. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Now, Mrs. Sargentini, 1 minute.
Dank u, voorzitter.
Thank you, President. We can organise a succession of summits on the migrant crisis with Turkey, without Turkey, with Greece, without the Greeks, with Austria, with the Balkan countries, without Greece again, and so on. We can do that many times, but we're not going to get control, traction on the migrant crisis if we can refuse to talk about the fact that last year 1 million people came, and that can happen this year too. If we're talking about closing borders, the external borders and the internal borders, then we're looking the other way, we're looking away, and that's what the Ministers of Justice and Internal Affairs are doing. When they talk about the possibility of having a new article in, or using a Schengen article to impose the controls. Now, unfortunately, the thing is, we have to accept the fact that we have got to find a place for these migrants and not shove them off to Greece or to Turkey. Thank you very much.
I have a blue card from Madame Votzenberg. Would you accept it? Okay, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I listened very carefully to what Mrs. Sargentini said. Now, of course, for you, the migrant problem is because of the summits you talked about, or is it because there's a lack of political will on the part of all the countries, all the member states, to sign up to relocation, to do what's necessary, and for the Union to have a firmer policy vis-à-vis Turkey to make sure the Turks sign up to their undertakings in the area of readmission? Thank you very much.
Dank u, voorzitter. Ik sta...
Thank you, Mr. President. This is a migrant crisis. It's a refugee crisis rather than just migrants. They should be getting asylum status. The problem, I believe, at the bottom line, is it's one of political resolve, political will. But thinking we can be tougher on Turkey, that's not the answer. 3 billion have not been paid over yet. I don't think we want to open new chapters with Turkey at all. We don't want them to become members. We don't want them to get visa-free travel. And we want the 2.5 million refugees to stay there. And that's not much of a negotiating position to have vis-à-vis the Turks.
Forget your 1 minute.
President, the debate has not convinced me about the question about being a bad thing for the British population to vote to leave. Look at the Council has not decided anything substantial on migration. It's gifted 3 billion to Turkey, provided they do X, Y, and Z. But listening to President Tusk, listening to you, President, really it's for the Commission. The European citizens, a European citizen was killed after being tortured grievously. Giulio Regeni, 28-year-old, responsible for human rights. Can his fate not be listened to? It's a disgrace. Egypt must tell us what exactly happened, and we must get to the bottom of this, get to the truth. The Italian government has got to get a reply. And the High Representative Mogherini is not there, and that is it's outrageous. Thank you. A disgrace.
Tulis, 1 minute.
Thank you very much. The recent European summit demonstrated that the building of Europe does not have a future, and it's in its present format. At some stage, quite soon, developments are going to speed up quicker and overtake its ability to respond. The UK wants a special, exceptional status for it to stay in, to defend its citizens and its national sovereignty. But other countries have got citizens, and they've got national sovereignty. They should be able to ask for the same thing. Why won't they follow suit? The fact of the matter is that Greece itself has now been strangled and asphyxiated. No sign of European solidarity. And the fact is that the Union is based on a tissue of lies. Now, the presence of NATO in the Aegean, the Greek people regard this as treachery on the part of the government and indeed our so-called allies who are snuggling up to Turkey, a country which has no place in Europe. Make all the plans you want for the Aegean and to turn Greece into an open-air detention centre. But we are wise to your plans. Thank you.
1 minute and 30 seconds.
President of the Council, Commissioner, I'd like to thank Presidents Tusk and Juncker for the good cooperation with the European Parliament during the summit that they offered and delivered. I think Europe's interests were not on sale in the negotiations, but the UK got what it needed for a successful referendum. We committed ourselves to comply with rules of independent legislation, but committed ourselves politically to try and bring this political project to a successful conclusion. And I think that's important, and the atmosphere of the negotiations bore that out. It's my view that this deal is one that is legally tenable, and we need to put in legislation that will stand the course. On that basis, we can achieve what David Cameron said at the end of the negotiations. The UK, too, in a changing world, has no opportunity for influence other than in conjunction with Europe, fighting terrorism and more besides. If you look that without us, the US and the Russians are arriving at a deal, that should bring it home that national states cannot achieve things alone. We either achieve things together or not at all. And I think that is a way of winning solidarity back for our citizens through Europe. And I think that this deal will be recognised by the British people, who have to decide on it. Thank you.
Card from Mr. Anderson. Only one blue card, Mr. Jurek. One. So, Mr. Anderson.
Thank you. Mr. Brok, I believe that a deal that lacks a recognition of the moral right of non-Eurozone countries to stay outside the failed experiment of the euro is lacking something. And I wonder, would you agree that a deal in due term needs to be completed at that?
The Treaty of Lisbon says clearly that 26 countries have obligations and commitments to the euro. 19 have fulfilled them, 7 are on the way to do that. And we have made this differentiation that they have to do that, and only 2 countries have opt-outs and opt-ins. We kept the stability of the development of the euro. It is agreed that the eurozone can be deepened, and it is agreed that everyone has here the same right and level playing field, but it is also agreed that these 7 countries will have all the advantages of future member countries of the eurozone, and we have said there is no multi-currency union. The euro is the currency of the European Union. That is the result, and it is accepted.
Well, thank you. Mrs. Rodriguez, 1 minute.
Dear Mr. President, you spoke about investing in Schengen. And I think this is a very good idea, because the current fragmentation of the Schengen area requires very urgent action. And we need to build up a real European border. But what is a real European border? I think should not be a wired wall, just building a kind of fortress Europe. A real European border with the 21st century concept should be rather an infrastructure able to organize and develop the relationship between Europe and its neighbour partners in such a way that a real European border should be an advanced infrastructure with logistics, intelligence, and able to provide basic safety for European citizens, also to manage flows and to provide assistance to refugees with decent standards. So I believe this is a big investment for the future, and I think this kind of investment should be decided quite soon.
Thank you. Now, Mrs. Atkinson, 1 minute.
First of all, I'd like to thank, we've got some constituents in from the southeast, and welcome. I hope you've enjoyed the debate. Well, that was a successful negotiation. David Cameron got precisely 1% of what he asked for, and only if there's treaty change. I represented the ENF in the Conference of Presidents last week, along with Mr Brok. Our arrogant Prime Minister decided he only wanted to meet half the MEPs and the EU leaders represented there, despite us actually representing hundreds of MEPs. That meeting told me what the British people need to know. There will be no treaty change. There will be no taking back control of our borders. There will be no restriction on the free movement of people. The so-called in-work benefits break could be challenged by the EU courts. And the only vote on the deal by the MEPs in this chamber is only indicative and not legally binding. So, Mr Brok, the Prime Minister's deal is not worth the paper it's written on, and that was told to him by his Justice Secretary, Michael Gove, today. The EU courts and the EU politicians can rip it up straight after the referendum, and the only way to get real change is to vote leave.
Thank you. Mrs. Šojdrová, 1 minute and 30 seconds.
Děkuji, vážený pane předsedo.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Dear friends, I welcome the deal that has been achieved as an expression of a will of 27 countries under conditions that are acceptable both for the UK and for everybody else, and as sensible conditions. We of course have to be aware that this deal means further negotiations on legislative changes, which will be also discussed here. I think the red line are our common values and the no treaty change principle. I respect everybody who is able to stand against populism, and I'm very glad to hear the voices for staying inside the EU, even from the UK. I'm glad to have heard Mr. Fox speaking in favour. On the other hand, we can hear Mr. Farage, who misinterpreted the Czech Prime Minister, who only said that there may be another domino effect wave of disintegration that would be the negative consequence of any vote to leave. We do not want to leave the EU, but there is always the risk if the referendum ended up as a no. I am in favor of Mr. Tusk's negotiating energy, and I would like him to put the same energy into the migration crisis.
From our colleague, Mrs. Grappini. Okay, thank you. Mrs. Grappini.
Thank you, President. Ladies and gentlemen, I also agree that the UK should remain within the EU, and I understand that you believe that too. I'd like to ask you this question. Do you think after the concessions made by Council to the UK, and assuming the answer is yes, that the single market and equality of treatment and free movement will be respected? Thank you.
Floor.
I'm convinced that the agreement is all within the values, and the single market will be respected, and everything that you mentioned will also be respected. We will of course discuss any legislative aspects, but the principles of the single market should not be violated.
Mr. Weidenholzer, 1 minute.
Thank you, President. Well, it's very good that we have a basis for the referendum in the UK, which means we can just hope now that the British people take the right decision. I'm convinced that they will do. Unfortunately, other important decisions were postponed, particularly the resolution of the refugee crisis, an issue that is affecting Europe a great deal at the moment. And let's hope that the Council summit on the 7th of March can finally put get a decision on that, giving the right aid and structures for the countries of destination. We need better security and controls on the borders. We can't allow the internal borders to be restored and rebuilt as an alternative to that. We don't want Greece to have to deal with it alone, and we want to make sure human rights are protected for these refugees. All of these European solutions that we've talked so much about need to be implemented properly, and the Bertelsmann Foundation have said very clearly that it's time for Europe now and not for for member states to go it alone.
1 minute and 30 seconds.
Meine Herren Präsidenten.
Presidents, ladies and gentlemen, both topics, the migrant issue and the UK referendum, have something in common, which is that there are too many politicians who have a lack of responsibility, a lack of seriousness, and who are willing to stoke up fears in people in order to grandstand. The fact is that there are people from our political camps, our own political camps, who have a domestic or a conflict internal to their own party, who want to increase their profile even at the expense of European solidarity and on the back of the European project. And I must call on everyone, please put an end to these. Do not play political games in this way. It is too serious, whether it's the migrant crisis or the UK referendum. We're talking here about the unity in Europe, this union of ours, this community. It's not about renationalisation and playing out our own egos. And let it be said loud and clear, it's unacceptable for a breach of the law on one side to be retaliated to by others, and for TAT to proliferate. We are not going to. The sins of one cannot be redeemed by the sins of another. Our common values, our decisions, are sufficient in and of themselves to address the problems and to get forward movement towards solutions and credibility and not chaos. Thank you.
You have one blue card, and unfortunately it's from Mr. Balčitis. No, sir. Mr. Rathan.
Je partage votre appréciation.
C'est Mr. Balčitis who has been... Excuse me, sir. Excuse me, sir. Excuse me. It was Mr. Balčitis who has asked first. So, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. I regret it.
I'm
Mr.
sorry.
Balčitis.
Yes, of course. Ačiū pirmininkė. Gerbiamas Karas.
Thank you, President. Mr. Karas, you said a great deal in your contribution, and I also believe that the UK should remain within the European Union, and I hope that good sense prevails. But do you not think that the European Commission should put in place a set of contingency measures which could be applied in the event that the UK leaves the European Union? We've heard a great deal spoken about the City of London today, but I think we ought to be speaking about a number of potential consequences, the use of our infrastructures and other related questions. Shouldn't we talk about this now?
The negotiations of the recent days, and I must say that this is not stressed enough. Colleagues Elmar Brok, Mr. Gualtieri, Mr. Verhofstadt, members of this European Parliament helped. They made a contribution to to delivering a result which guarantees that together with the Commission the joint European approach is not sacrificed on the altar of national interests. And of course, as Manfred Weber said, he said that the purpose was to strengthen this union, and if the UK were to leave, that would not. That is a process. We would not be voting on the process. It would be yes or no. But any referendum which is brought by the problem is that a referendum takes the powers away from parliaments. Thank you very much.
Because of the misunderstanding before, I think it is fair to have an exception and allow Mr. Ratton to ask his question too. Would you accept it? Yes, please. You have no escape.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, President. Thank you, Mr. Karas. I have to admit that it's hard for me to regard the agreement achieved between our heads of state and government and Mr. Cameron this weekend as a success, because this kind of melodrama conveys a terrible image of political impotency, as if Europe was characterised by a lack of leadership and will and vision, and that's not conducive to the support of the British people for a European project. Doesn't it convey the image of national selfishness without any further prospects? I'm not happy with this agreement because it opens the door to all sorts of claims and negotiations. For 4 months we'll be unable to take any decision because the referendum will not have yet happened.
Thank you once again. There is a degree of commonality between the two sides. There are decisions, and the problem has been a lack of seriousness in acting on those decisions. And it's up to the people who take those decisions, the decision makers. They have got to take themselves seriously. And if they don't, then, and look at the migrant crisis and also the agreement, the settlement with the United Kingdom. Not that the settlement is simply a matter of yes or no it's in-out. And I believe politicians should bring to bear more seriousness and act on their decisions. There are problems in the member states when it comes to decisions where one country is being played off against the other. And I believe that if everyone was as good as their word, we'd all be a great deal better off. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice President. It's in everybody's interest for the UK to remain inside the European Union. Nonetheless, if we read the new settlement, we cannot be fully happy, especially concerning the curtailment of social benefits. This is clearly discriminatory. It leaves a bitter taste in our mouth because Mr. Farage and the extreme right were the ones who started this campaign against workers from the East. We know that Hungarians and the Poles don't go to the UK because of the social benefits. They go there because there's no work for them at home. No social benefit is going to compensate these people for not being able to see their families every evening. They have a bitter taste in their mouth because once again we are making those pay for conflict who are the most vulnerable, because by cutting social benefits we are mostly damaging the poor people. This is the kind of Europe we live in. If there's a conflict, the first solution that comes to our mind, why not cut social spending? Once again we come up with the same solution, and once again we now have member states who want to follow suit. I want to fight for a Europe which does not which is not held together by lower social spending.
Šuica, 1 minute and 30 seconds.
Thank you very much. We've built a European Union to prevent conflict, to live in peace, and not to succumb to populism. Those who were creating this union were brave enough to create a Schengen zone and the Eurozone and to unite Europe. So we have to preserve this. Our President Weber rightly pointed out that in the Libyan war, in Ukraine, in Syria, we prioritize this British issue over these other issues. But we need to ask ourselves, is this a real priority in the crisis that we live in with the unemployment that is so high in the Union? Mr. Juncker recently said that either we will be brave or everything will fall apart. I believe that we need to be brave, that the European Union must not fall, and that I believe that the British people will be reasonable enough and make the right decision in June. I believe they will vote yes to stay in the European Union. It is the only right solution, both for the Union and for Great Britain. You, Mr. Tusk, said, and thank you for this, that this is one of the most dangerous stages in the history of EU, and I think this is correct. But we are also in the midst of a horrendous humanitarian migration crisis ever since the Second World War, and this is why I am waiting for the 7th of March with great optimism, because you will have the results of the summit with Turkey by then, and I hope we will no longer lead similar discussions.
Before asking you whether you accept the blue card from Mr. Jakovčić, I have to announce that we will ask our colleague, Mrs. Guillaume, to take the floor, and then, please, we would listen to President Tusk because he has to leave, and then we'll continue our discussion. So this is the scenario. So would you accept the blue card from Mr. Jakovčić, please?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ms. Šuica, for accepting my blue card. I was listening to you very carefully. I know you very well, and I know that you want the UK to stay in the European Union. I feel the same. However, the two of us or the European Parliament will not be deciding on this. The British people will be deciding of this. So if the British people decide that they want to leave, do you agree with me that this is then the definite answer of the UK from the EU and that there should not be any further negotiations? In that case, because the UK will have to renegotiate its renewed membership of the EU.
I will try to answer your question, and yes, I agree with you that the deal that has been struck is a final deal. But the European Council has made concessions and has voted on unanimously, and I do not think that we should grant the British a possibility to renegotiate their membership. So the answer is actually yes.
Thank you, President. This question of Brexit and the questions of the refugee crisis essentially are one and the same. It's very difficult to remain united in the face of adversity. Migration was postponed at the result of, in this council meeting, what was decided? Absolutely nothing. There were some interim agreements to continue what was already happening, but unfortunately work on the ground was not furthered, and help to Greece is still desperately needed. Now, there are still lots of obstacles with a lot of things in Europe, processing asylum requests in some countries and protecting external borders in other cases. And at the moment, Europe is isolated, particularly Greece, because the route through the Western Balkans is taking its toll. There's chaos on the borders. The Commission and the President of Council have demonstrated the need to respond to this humanitarian crisis. So what's the point of a European Council if it's not going to take these major decisions? It's not just a question of communication of politics, and unfortunately this was no different.
Floor, and then Commissioner Dombrovskis will have the floor at the end. So, Mr.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you for your understanding. Just two remarks. The two issues we are discussing today, the UK settlement and migration, are strictly interconnected. I have absolutely no doubt that how we are going to challenge the migration crisis will be of key significance for the referendum campaign. All those who want to keep the unity of the European Union, the unity of the whole of the West, and who feel that we have found ourselves in an epic moment, should beat such a common plan with the fullest determination possible. What I mean by a common plan is an effective implementation of our decisions, full respect of the Schengen Code, and common action with Turkey. If this emerging unity of action on the migration crisis is violated by anyone, they may in fact contribute to the UK leaving the EU. As I have already said, the UK settlement will enter into force only if the British people vote to stay. If they vote to leave, the settlement will cease to exist. And no one should have any illusions in this case. It was not one of the many rounds of negotiations on the UK settlement in the EU. It was the first round and the last. There will be no more. Thank you. And sorry again, but for technical reason I have to go. Thank you.
Mr. Tusk, And now I am asking Mr. Kefalogiannis to take the floor for 1 minute and 30 seconds.
Mr. President, it's difficult to disagree with the assessments of President Juncker and President Tusk about the settlement, the agreement between the EU and the United Kingdom. Looking forward to the referendum, no negotiations thereafter. The UK, Great Britain, and the Zurich speech, you remember, about the United States of Europe in a great speech, the will of the peoples of Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland. This referendum is jeopardising the UK. It could well become a smaller version, Little England, holding its own against the world. I intend to continue to invest in Schengen and in keeping those borders and not in closing those borders. Turkey is part of the problem and also part of the solution. But with the migrant crisis, they are leaving, they're wading through the traffickers and irregular arrivals. They are becoming a magnet for countries, for people coming from the countries of Northern Africa. They have not delivered on the readmission undertakings. I believe all of us have got to search for an answer, look for the solution. I think that Europe is capable of doing just that, in coming up, in devising a solution. Thank you very much.
Danke sehr. Die nächste Rednerin ist nun.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, Ms. Kyenge, for 1 minute.
Grazie, signor Presidente.
Thank you, President. We have just witnessed the umpteenth European Council with no results and has put off immigration still longer, which is the acid test for the European Union. To cope with the migration crisis, the EU objective should be containing the flows, protecting external borders and reducing illegal immigration. And the global approach of the European Council, is that all it amounts to? We need a long-term policy to manage the migration and allow safe legal access channels. And also we need to be able to integrate migrants into the economic, political and social fabrics of our countries. The draft report of the European Parliament on migration provides tangible answers to some of these questions. Therefore, that's the comprehensive approach to migration in our view, with more sharing of responsibility. President, in the absence of a perspicacious long-term vision for Europe, I think we have an unprecedented failure of politics, and that is an issue for free movement of people. Thank you.
Danke sehr.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Gunnar Hökmark for 1.5 minutes.
I think it's striking that in the discussions we have had this afternoon, very few of them were belonging to the, so to say, the antis, are discussing about the problems we are facing. This is not only about European Union and how we would like European Union to develop. This is about Europe and the stability, security, prosperity. And it's challenged. It's easy to see. Putin, Russia and Ukraine, provocations to a number of European member states. And of course we know that a lot of those who are anti would be happy to give in to Putin. They have voted in that way here. And then we have the need for economic recovery, prosperity. And of course, a lot of those on that side, they don't want open markets. But if we look upon the problems regarding the stability, Putin, as I said, the fall down of states in the Middle East and Northern Africa, the refugee crisis, climate policies, I don't think anyone can see that we can solve these problems or deal with these problems without being unified. And those who would like the fragmentation, they would only honour the hopes of the Putins and the Le Pens and the extremists in the Middle East and in Europe. We must defeat them, and the United Kingdom must understand how important the United Kingdom is in Europe. Thank you.
Okay. Herr Hökmark.
Mr. Hökmark, there's a blue card for you from Ms. Marek. Will you accept it?
I would have been surprised if no one had asked for it.
Good, Herr Jurek, 30
Mr. Jurek, 30 seconds.
Dziękuję za to, co mówił.
Thank you very much, and thank you what you were saying about the threat which is Russia for Europe, especially for the part of Europe where my country is. But don't you see that really it is not the people who want to discuss the European Union and its crisis, but it's the governments and huge interest groups which tolerate such endeavors as Nord Stream 2. Which are dangerous for the interests of my country and your country. So let us not blame nations and public opinion. Let us mobilize together countries and governments. Thank you.
Herr Hökmark, 30 seconds.
30 seconds, Mr. Hökmark.
Thank you very much. I must say I'm quite convinced that the people of Europe are giving priority to the stability and security of our part of the world. They want peace, and they see the threats. They want us to have a responsible energy policy, climate policy, environmental policy. And it's up to us to secure that we can deal with that and show the way. And I don't think, and that's interesting, no one in this chamber has this afternoon said that we can solve these problems better by going alone. Because when you are alone in a world that needs unity.
Please come to the end.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Elena Valenciano for 1 minute.
Gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you, President. We have spent a great deal of time trying to avoid a Brexit, and I think we've done well to try to avoid a Brexit. But I'm rather surprised just how little effort and time has been put into trying to avoid what I would call a Eurexit. And what I mean by that is the European Union's governments removing themselves from their joint responsibility for dealing with the refugee crisis. The refugee crisis is the real crisis in Europe at the moment. This is something that demonstrates what the European Union has tried to achieve but hasn't managed to. And I think it puts at threat everything that we've fought for and we've tried to build. By focusing our energies on Brexit, we've forgotten this possibility of Eurexit, the disappearance of our principles of solidarity and justice that the European Union has represented to date and no longer does. Thank you very much. And the last speaker before the Catch the Eye procedure is Mr. Paulo Rangel for 1.5 minutes. Madam President, I have to say that the result of this European Council summit, essentially on the question of the United Kingdom and the outcome, the agreement, was frankly satisfactory. I think the agreement manages to maintain the interests of the European Union, but to a certain extent tries to accommodate the complexities that were brought up by the United Kingdom's requests. And so I think the result is a set of provisions which are balanced, appropriate and acceptable. Now I think what's decisive in this matter now is for the European Union firstly not to interfere in the sovereign choice of the British people. They will be absolutely free to decide whether or not they want to stay within the European Union or to leave, but for the European Union nonetheless to make it extremely clear that if the UK votes to leave the European Union, that will have consequences, and those consequences will not be reversible. It's absolutely essential for British voters, and at the end of the day for all European citizens, to understand that there are advantages and disadvantages of the European Union. There are good things and bad things in the European Union. There are duties and obligations. So it's more than just a one-time only vote. It's something which has consequences, and those consequences will be leaving the European Union. So I think, taking into account all of those factors, the British people, as all other people are, will be free and sovereign to make their choice. Thank you very much. That brings us then to the Catch the Eye procedure, and so far 14 people have requested the floor. I'm thinking that we'll be able to take about 10, depending on how things pan out with time. If everybody sticks to their time, it will be easier to take more people. The first speaker is Mairead McGUINNESS for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam President. The Council meeting discussed migration, and yet most of our debate here is talking about the UK referendum. So I want to begin by addressing this migration question, because it is linked to what's happening in terms of the UK and the potential outcome of that vote. I think that the European Union has been found wanting. If you look at the neighbouring countries like Turkey, Lebanon and Jordan, who have taken a great deal of people and who have been made promises to in terms of funding from the European Union, but have yet to receive that money, I think that issue needs much more attention and much deeper focus, because concerns of citizens on that issue is feeding into negativity around the European Union. On the UK issue, I've already spoken in raising a question. We must not interfere. But we do and have space, I think, to give our opinions. And as a near neighbour in terms of a border with the United Kingdom, I'm an Irish member and we have Northern Ireland on our borders, we will have an interest in the outcome, and clearly our interest is maintaining the UK in the European Union.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Nicola Caputo for 1 minute.
Thank you, President. Responding to the migration crisis, Council was happy to accept NATO offers to patrol the Aegean Sea access routes. Frontex should cooperate closely with NATO, implementing the EU-Turkey action plan and global strategic priorities should reduce the flow of migrants. We have to reduce migration from Turkey. This will require an extra effort to guarantee effective implementation of the action plan. Extra efforts are required to make sure that this is effective, and the 7th of March summit will be decisive. Brexit, I think potential loss of the UK would be fatal for the EU, but also for the UK economy. An agreement has been made, but we need to make our best efforts to maintain Great Britain in the EU. We need more Europe to change Europe and save Europe.
Thank you very much. And now Mr. Notis Marias for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam President. The Turks continue to send thousands across the seas to Greece. The FYROM closes its borders. It's perfectly possible that Greece is set fair to becoming a huge open-air Dachau. The pressure continues to exist, despite the large numbers who have come to Greece. Only 400 have been resettled or relocated, and the fact of the matter is that they want to come to Greece because they hope that they'll be able to carry on towards Germany, and they want to go via Bulgaria. The only way is for Greece to leave Schengen and to be able to use its military, in other words its navy, in order to patrol its maritime borders. It must stop applying Dublin III for reasons of public safety and public security. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next speaker is Ms. Izaskun Bilbao Barandika for 1 minute. Thank you, President. Since the 1930s, my group has been focused on the European project, and that's why we have to express our concern for the content of an agreement which weakens the concept of federal Europe, the concept of citizenship, within Europe and is an opaque form of negotiation from the outset. The European Union has to improve, it's true, but this document is much more a question of trying to solve Cameron's internal problems rather than trying to solve Europe and Europeans' problems. Once again, the national debate has taken precedence over European goals, and there are several other European problems which are more pressing. It would be much more fitting, in fact, to talk about England exit than Brexit, because the Scottish and Welsh would probably want to remain part of our union even if Britain leaves. So I think we have to acknowledge that the Scots, the Welsh, as well as the Catalans and Flemish, have to be acknowledged in their requests. This is democracy and this is fully European. Thank you very much. Ms. González Peñas, for 1 minute, is the next speaker. Thank you, Madam President. Dear colleagues, this weekend we woke up to an agreement with the United Kingdom which tells us a great deal about the Europe we're building. It's a Europe of two speeds, where the principle of constant crisis is already a reality. The abandonment of southern countries, forcing them into agreements against their will with threats and against the principle of equal treatment, which is what Europe is supposed to be about. The Council is aggravating questions of inequality, but not just about incomes, but also status of individuals. Some 180,000 citizens live in Europe from Spain. These people are now going to be second-class citizens, even though they contribute and work in those countries. They work contributing to the UK economy. So this agreement goes against Article 45 and 46 of the European Union. This creates a serious difference between those countries which receive austerity and have no basis for negotiation. Thank you. Thank you. Next speaker is Zoltán Bajcsú for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I would like to quote from the document accepted at the summit. The relationships between the UK and the EU, Member State sovereignty. The Member States agree that the UK will not commit itself to ever closer union in the European Union. This will be built into the treaties when they will be amended next time. So these references will not cover the United Kingdom. This is a very important statement in the agreement. This is not only symbolic. In later legislation, all those laws that point towards ever closer union will not affect the United Kingdom. But this raises the question of discrimination. Anti-discrimination is a European value. So this right has to be given to all other countries who have a vested interest in looser cooperation. I hope Hungary will use this opportunity soon.
And now Csaba Sógor is next for 1 minute. If he's in the room.
It is evident that far from being the far-sighted reform of the working of the EU that it was intended to be, or a diplomatic victory, the agreement reached at the European Council last weekend on the avoidance of Brexit is rather a deal to satisfy the concerns, and I would add exaggerate ones, of a single member state. Of course, the concessions that proportionately affect the new member states were worth making, and both the European Union and Britain is better off with the latter in the Union than outside of it. It's not European nation states by themselves that are able to address the economic, financial and security challenges of the globalized world, but a stronger, more united and more efficient Union. However, we should be extremely cautious that this settlement does not open the back door for special requests from other countries for their short-term or long-term existing or perceived problems. Thanks.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Juan Fernández López Aguilar for 1 minute. Madam President, the Council conclusions really present us with a fait accompli. Once again, we get put in a situation where accepting the agreement might be better than rejecting it, because that will lead to the UK leaving. But once again, this is responding simply to Mr Cameron's requests to unite his divided party, the British Tories. The British people will be asked on the 23rd of June whether they want to remain or leave. But the more important issue here is European procedure and legislative procedure has not been respected. We're only going to be asked to rubber stamp this later on. Now, the free movement of people is enshrined in the treaties. If we don't consider immigrants from within Europe to be the same status and have the same rights as UK citizens, and particularly if the European Council's conclusions relating to the refugee crisis are still not implemented, we'll see continued problems. These reallocation problems continue to exist. Thank you very much. Ms. Tomasic next for 1 minute.
Thank you. The statements that followed after the negotiations made us think that both sides were happy with the deal. However, the reactions of the British citizens show us that there is still a large number of those who are not pleased with the deal. This tells us that even if the UK stays in the European family, we still need to reform this community. The federal model that many European leaders call for, many of the members of this House too, is outdated and is not adapted to the modern times. What we need is greater decentralization of political power on the European and on the national level. Let's not fool ourselves. If the United Kingdom stays in the EU, this will not silence the millions of Brits who are criticizing the current state of this community. On the other hand, if the UK leaves, this will not silence the rest of us who call for a serious reform.
Thank you. Mr. Nicola Huntis for 1 minute.
Herr Huntis.
Thank you, Madam President. The Commission's policy is hypocritical and has been hypocritical in the migrant issue, and we knew that. With the recent decisions, you're telling us that you are unable to implement an EU approach to the migrant crisis. What happened to the all-powerful EU institutions which are imposing the memorandum, imposing policies of austerity? Is it the same institution, or are you unable to do that? Do you do things you can do? In January, 60,000 refugees came to Greece. They have now been enclaved at the borders, and this is going to enclave a further million. And what are you now doing? You're trying to get the Dublin regulation working again. And now with the agreement of the Greek government, we're seeing NATO patrols in Europe is going to make the situation worse, de facto. And we are going to be forced into geopolitical upheaval. So there are things you can do and things you can't do for Greece, it would seem. And it does depend what kind of Europe you are looking for. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Mr. Konstantinos Papadakis for 1 minute.
Thank you very much. Let's not kid ourselves. It's because the Council decisions have been implemented, not because they've been breached, that thousands of refugees are now enclaved in Greece. On the 12th of February, the European Council approved recommendations. We're bringing many things in its wake. Border controls and checks. It's given a green light to border closures, fences, refugee caps, and the monopolies can now pick and choose to get the cheap labour they're looking for. And now with the agreement of the Greek government, the NATO wolf is now going to be challenging sovereign rights of Greece. It's going to encourage the provocations of Turkey. That's what the EU and the NATO are doing. The people of Greece, if peoples remain in chains, then they're going to be in real and present danger. We've got to help the people fight the racists and the fascists and make sure that people are able to get through to their country of final destination. Thank you very much.
The next speaker is Ms. Maria Spiraki for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam President, Vice President Dombrovskis. Joint action has to be our guide, our guiding star. Only joint action, a common endeavour, is going to help us. What's going to happen now with forced relocation? Is the Commission going to say, well, if that's not happening, then there's going to be a price to pay? There are going to be penalties that Member States who are in default are not going to receive structural spending money? Or are they going to be able to to simply go it alone, as in countries such as Hungary? Are we going to be in breach of international law? Is a country like Turkey going to be able to breach international law? We don't want any foot dragging from the Member States, nor from the Commission. They must keep the Member States to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The last speaker is Mr. Brennan in this Catch the Eye procedure for 1 minute.
I'm sure I'm not alone in being worried about the position that the Democratic Unionist Party have taken in Northern Ireland. They are opposed, apparently, to the United Kingdom staying in the European Union. But as their name suggests, they are a unionist party. However, if the United Kingdom leaves, this will trigger a referendum, a further referendum in Scotland. And if Scotland leaves the United Kingdom, there will be no union. There will be no Union Jack. There can be no Union Jack without the flag of St Andrews. So I'd ask the Democratic Unionist Party to reconsider their position. How can they be a unionist party and be working to destroy the Union? Please change your position.
Thank you very much. Yes, Ms. Morvai, go ahead.
Ein Geschäftsordnungspunkt.
Is this a point of order?
I signed up for Catch the Eye at the very beginning of this afternoon, and I wonder what was the principle of selection. And the other thing is, what would happen in this chamber if once more than like 50 people out of the 750 something would show up, if there is no chance to speak at all for those of us, those couple of dozens of us who appear. Thank you very much.
Ms Morvai, on the Catch the Eye procedure, we try to take as many people as possible, but we have to try and maintain a balance between the larger groups and the smaller groups. And the larger groups, we've had 3 speakers, from the smaller groups 2, and from those who don't belong to any group, your colleague from Hungary, from the same party as you, and took one, and somebody else from the non-attached. I think that is understandable. You were the 3rd person from the non-attached members who were taken under Catch the Eye. There were 2 others I took as well, so I think that's a fair distribution in this plenary. Okay, Commissioner Dombrovskis, you have the floor now to wind up on behalf of the Commission.
Thank you, Madam Chair, honourable members of European Parliament. On UK negotiations, heads of state and government agreed a deal last week to accommodate the concerns of Prime Minister Cameron, and the decision now is in the hands of British people. As said by the President Juncker, should the outcome of the referendum be positive, the Commission would immediately put legislative proposals on the table to European Parliament and Council to implement the deal. On refugee crisis, the European Commission is working day and night to handle the crisis and the flow of refugees. And we believe that solution can be only European solution. Member States need to cooperate among themselves and implement agreements already reached. So we can see first positive signs with a better management of our external borders, hotspots, relocations and return policy, and the Commission is working to present further measures and bring further improvements to the situation in the very short term. Concerted action with our external partners is also of utmost importance, and meeting with Turkey and EU leaders on 7th of March will be key in this regard. So we need to provide a coordinated response to the refugees crisis challenge. Thank you.
No, jetzt geht's. Danke sehr.
That's working now. Thank you very much, Commissioner Dombrovskis. That concludes this debate. This brings us on to the next item on the agenda, which is a joint debate on the European Semester 2016. The report, and in fact there are several of them. There's Ms. Rodriguez's report on the European Semester for Economic Policy Coordination, Annual Growth Survey 2016. Then we have Mrs. Ribeiro's report, the European Semester for Economic Policy Coordination, Employment and Social Aspects in the Annual Growth Survey 2016. And we have Mrs. Styler's report on the Single Market Governance within the European Semester 2016. The first speaker is the rapporteur, Sophia Ribeiro, for 5 minutes.
The report on the social and employment aspects of the European semester, Madam President, aim at turning Europe into a modern social Europe, unlocking the potential it has and sorting out problems that it faces now. There are various measures we'll need to implement to rebalance the social and economic difficulties and drive sustainable social development. The economic and financial system means that we need to use it to employ and to improve the lot of our citizens. That's why we need to continue consolidating the systems which we have. The goal being social development, which needs to be cross-cutting and involve all EU policies, means we need to monitor said policies, making sure that member states and European institutions guarantee in a responsible fashion long-term stability of their political and budgetary options so that we have sustainable growth in Europe. With that in mind, the report focuses on the need to consolidate public finances and making certain that many member states at the moment improve their economic situation so as to guarantee social stability, not just for now, but also laying the foundations for the future for our young people. As we've seen in the last few years, the problems of the financial crisis were dealt blows to the capacity building of public financing, leading to large deficits and other kinds of problems. This financial consolidation needs to be flanked with growth policies, which will lead to a series of structural reforms, which will improve productivity and improve the social role of states in the light of the structural problems which we're facing today. Sustainability of social security systems and pension systems are perhaps the most telling aspect of this challenge, because of course we have an aging European population. It's a vital area for development and growth. We need to make sure also that our education systems equip our young people with the requisite skills, particularly in new parts of the labour market, such as the digital economy, the blue economy and the green economy. It's a vital area if we are going to supply the needs of companies which are the driving force for growth. European policies need to allow public and private investment to happen at European level, but this investment needs to be targeted, making certain that profits are made but social goals are met as well. It shouldn't simply be a tap for which public money through which public money flows. The process therefore will be an unprecedented monitoring of social indicators in terms of youth employment and long-term employment and other problems that member states face. If this goes through, we'll be passing a powerful message to Commission and Council that apart from the existing indicators we have, we need to have machinery to make sure that our policies are having a positive effect on the daily lives of our citizens. This will be a way of guaranteeing that internal imbalances in member states are being assessed with an eye to addressing them in social and economic reforms where necessary. This is a big step forward which will allow us to boost the social pillar in Europe. Let me end, Madam President, by thanking the shadows from the various political groups who, with tremendous commitment, worked with me to allow us to draw up this joint report. Thank you very much.
Thank you
very much. Now, Ms. Rodriguez, 4 minutes as well.
Many thanks, dear President, Mr. Vice President of the European Commission. We